Paladins of the Realm, Team Fortress 2, and Overwatch are all team-based first-person shooters with a variety of colorful and interesting characters and gameplay involving capturing and contesting points and moving payloads. There's been plenty of discussion all over the internet claiming one game copied another in some way, shape, or form. The argument usually goes that Overwatch ripped off TF2 and Paladins ripped off Overwatch. However, each game has very positive ratings and a huge player base, so it clearly isn't as cut and dry as some people make it out to be. In this video, I will examine some of the key differences and similarities of each game, and what it is that makes each game unique and enjoyable in its own right. So here's my attempt at an objective take on objective-based shooters. Let's start with Team Fortress 2, one of the most popular multiplayer FPSs of all time, and the supposed inspiration for many FPSs to follow. Since its release on October 9th, 2007, TF2 has seen a steady growth in player base, along with a huge array of updates and changes. Team Fortress 2 is arguably the most different from the other two games. First of all, TF2 doesn't work with abilities, but rather with weapon loadouts. There are 9 different classes, each of which has at least 2 gun slots and a melee weapon slot, which players can customize from the wide variety of weapons available. There are plenty of perks to this, of course. It allows for very unique gameplay and having to change up your strategy not based on what classes someone is playing necessarily, but what weapon they are using for that class. Like playing the engineer but don't like having to set up and camp a certain spot? Equip the gunslinger and let your mini sentries rip. Like the soldier but want even more mobility? Equip the rocket jumper to fly about and throw in the man treads and marking garden for some sweet combos. And most of the time, no one loadout is strictly better than another, barring basic loadouts, as most weapons have drawbacks for all their perks. But naturally there are downsides to this system as well. Since the game is now free to play and has been since 2011, it makes its money solely from players purchasing weapons and cosmetics. This creates an environment that is rather unfriendly to players who are just starting out and only have access to the basic weapons, which usually have much better alternatives. Sure, weapons can be found randomly during games, but there's little chance of finding a particular weapon you want, leaving free-to-play is just out of luck. Another huge difference between TF2 and the other games is the ammo system. In Overwatch and Paladins, when you run out of ammunition, you can simply reload, and you can do this indefinitely. TF2, meanwhile, features ammo more akin to traditional single-player FPSs and the more realistic entries of the genre, where you have to collect ammo from packs on the ground in order to reload. This adds an additional gameplay element that, while sometimes gets annoying, adds a new layer of strategy, as it's something more to keep track of. As for the competitive scene in TF2, well, there really isn't one. At least not a serious one. Players of TF2 had wanted a competitive game mode for years, but Valve only released it almost 9 years after the game's release. Valve seemed to push the competitive updates to coincide with Overwatch's rise in popularity and subsequent release, perhaps in an attempt to not lose players to this new competitor, but it's hard to say if that worked out or not. On the plus side, TF2 has some unique game modes not found in Paladins or Overwatch, the prime example being Capture the Flag, in which both teams attempt to secure the opponent's intelligence, the flag, and get it to their own base. First team to a certain number of points wins. Other game modes include Payload Race, which is exactly what it sounds like, Special Delivery, where both teams try to get an intelligence and deliver it to a certain point before the other team can, and Control Points, where teams go back and forth amongst control points until one team has them all. Team Fortress 2 also features the ability for users to make custom maps, allowing for new and unique games apart from what the developers create. And the server browser really allows this map and mode diversity to flourish. You can always find specifically what you want. Lastly, TF2, while undeniably team-based, seems much less focused on team play than Paladins or Overwatch. Without a set restriction on team sizes, teams can easily get out of hand and become unwieldy or uncoordinated, potentially leading to frustration, just a bad time for all. As a drawback to the server browser, there's not really a proper matchmaking system, and with that, teams are often wildly unbalanced in terms of skill, also leading to a poor player experience. If TF2 was the progenitor, Overwatch is one of its most significant spawn. It actually originally started as an MMO called Titan, but once that game was cancelled, Overwatch rose from its proverbial ashes. Overwatch was released on May 24th, 2016, after an extensive closed beta period, and was met with incredibly excited players and fantastic review scores. So what did Overwatch supposedly copy from Team Fortress 2? Well, it cannot be denied that there are similarities, as is unavoidable when creating games of the same genre, but Overwatch maybe takes it a little further than that. Besides the core game modes being essentially identical, classes in Overwatch seem to oftentimes draw inspiration from those of TF2. And this isn't something that Blizzard tries to hide. Jeff Kaplan, head game director for Overwatch, said himself that their game being compared to Valve's is an enormous compliment, and they admire TF2 and its development team greatly. Unlike TF2, Overwatch has, at the time of making this video, 23 classes, each with set abilities and weapons that cannot be changed. This allows for much easier balancing of characters, and can be better for players, as it's easier to tell what you're up against, but it lacks the personalization the TF2 system allows. Each hero in Overwatch also features an ultimate ability. An ultimate is very powerful and oftentimes game-changing ability which can only be used after it's been charged up. You gain ult charge slowly over time, but also by dealing damage and by healing, be it healing yourself or others. A good comparison to TF2 here would be in the medic's Uber Charge, another powerful ability that takes time to charge up. Ultimate abilities can fit into one of several different categories, such as utility ults, crowd control ults, damage dealing ults, or support ults. While some ultimates have less impact on the game in general, such as Widowmaker's Infrasight, many can turn the tide of a battle instantly, or change a game from losing to winning. Sometimes an entire game comes down to who can get their ultimate ready faster. It's clear to see where Overwatch may have drawn inspiration from TF2 in some of its heroes. Widowmaker and Hanzo each take major aspects from the Sniper, for example, using the Sniper Rifle and the Huntsman respectively. Roadhog and Bastion each take different aspects from the Heavy, while Tracer takes Scout's mobility and up-close and personal playstyle. Junkrat is similar to the Demo Man, while Torbjorn and Symmetra each take different elements from the Engineer, with Torb's turret and usage of scrap metal, and Symmetra's teleporter. Pharah shares the Soldier's mobility and use of a rocket launcher, and Mercy's healing and damage boost is similar to the Medic's Medigun and Kritzkrieg. Nothing taken is blatantly unique to Team Fortress, of course, but it is clear to see where inspiration was indeed taken. Despite this, for every character that draws inspiration from TF2, there's just as many, if not more classes that are completely unique compared to anything seen in team-based FPSs before. Zarya, Zenyatta, Lucio, Mei, Winston, D.Va, Reinhardt, Genji, and Sombra, to name a few, are a far cry from the simple designs of TF2's classes. Despite costing $40, Overwatch comes pre-packed with all classes and maps available, leaving skill and team play being the only true variables at play, not whether or not you have the best weapons. Players can earn fun cosmetics from loot boxes, which are gained from leveling up or playing the arcade, but they don't seem to share the same uniqueness and frenzy to obtain that TF2's hats and unusuals induce in players. Overwatch has relatively easy communication, with voice chat being available for teams and for groups, and the communication wheel, which is much simpler than TF2's hotkey talking, where usually MEDIC is the only thing you'll ever be hearing from a player. Overwatch is much more conducive to team play as well, with matchmaking matching you with players of your skill level, usually, and communication between the 6 members of your team being required to optimize performance. Competitive play was introduced not long after the game's release, with incentives being points that can be used to buy shiny golden weapons for your favorite hero, and being able to flaunt that juicy, high skill rating. Overwatch also has, in my opinion, much better lore than TF2. And although the gameplay itself is non-canonical, regularly released animated shorts and comics, as well as map details and character interactions, do a very good job of establishing the future universe that Overwatch takes place in. Team Fortress, meanwhile, well, you'd be hard-pressed to find players who knew anything about the lore past Manco's a thing, and the 2 brothers were fighting, so they each hired a team of mercenaries who happened to be exact copies of each other, and then they fought! The arcade in Overwatch features several unique game modes as well, including 3v3 and 1v1 elimination, mystery heroes, and all brawls, featuring a variety of game modes with tweaked or unique rules compared to those of a normal game. Despite all this goodness, Overwatch does indeed lack a co-op or single-player campaign mode, present in TF2 in the form of Man vs. Machine. However, there was a game mode introduced in the Halloween seasonal event called Junkenstein's Revenge, which was rather similar to Man vs. Machine, and may be a sign of more co-op modes to come. Even still, Overwatch automatically gets a huge bonus due to its phenomenal development team, who works so hard to listen to player feedback and fix issues quickly. Meanwhile, Valve seems to take the attitude of, you'll play the game anyway, whatever. So overall, is it better? Is it worse? That's for you to decide. Overwatch and TF2 share several elements, but have very concretely separate and unique identities, ranging from map design to art style.
Yeah! That was awesome!
And lastly, we have Paladins, champions of the realm, often referred to as the poor man's Overwatch. I'll be honest, when I first saw this game I thought it was a blatant ripoff of Overwatch, but Hi-Rez's COO, Todd Harris, claims that the game did not draw inspiration from Overwatch, rather drawing mostly from TF2 like Overwatch did. Hi-Rez also claims that some mechanics appeared in their game first, but sometimes it's hard to tell for certain. So I played it to see for myself, and, well, I was sorta right in my judgment, but not entirely. Like with TF2 and Overwatch, there are similarities between classes, but it's taken even a step further. Any FPS needs a sniper class, so Kinessa or Shaolin, for example, aren't particularly offensive, but there's several classes with designs and abilities, along with the fact that Paladins shares that system of a weapon, several abilities, and an ultimate that charges up, that makes you think, huh, that seems a little too familiar. For example, a slow-firing, high-damage-dealing weapon isn't super unique, but coupled with the large, fat character and the ability to drag enemies closer to them with a hook, Makoa seems a little too much like Roadhog for it to be a coincidence. Even their names are similar. Victor is quite similar to Soldier 76 with his assault rifle, explosive ability, and sprint, while Drogoz mimics Pharah's rocket launcher and flying system to a T. Ruckus is basically just Diva. Bomb King's bombs on their own work more like the Demoman's sticky bombs and Junkrat's grenades, but coupled with a bomb jumping ability and an ultimate that turns the user into a rolling explosive, things seem fishy. A dwarvish man that builds things, or a person that builds a sentry gun aren't super special, but put together, there's blatant similarities between Barrack and Torbjorn. And with his revolver, Spectre-like abilities, and character design in general, Androxus just seems like a cross between Reaper and McCree. The worst defender overall is definitely Fernando. He happens to be a heavily armored knight, with a knack for doing good and defending the weak. That's a common trope, no big deal, but he also shoots fire from his primary weapon, and also has the ability to charge, and also has a giant, gosh darn blue, glowing, translucent rectangle! Fernando, from man, don't, am I right? But Paladins has its fair share of unique characters as well. Ying, Pip, Grok, and Grover, for example, feature interesting ability sets with at least somewhat unique gameplay styles. I suppose games are just good at coming up with unique supports. And for all those characters that have identical elements, they aren't overall clones, with each character featuring at least some new and interesting abilities. For example, I actually rather like the rest of Makoa's ability set. And there comes a point where you could even accuse Overwatch of ripping off Paladins, with Sombra's stealth working remarkably similarly disguised. But even the unique characters aren't entirely that. Abilities seem to become essentially mix and match sometimes, with similar abilities to Overwatch showing up in odd places. Makoa has a Genji ult, Grover has a Transcendence, and Droxus features a Genji deflect, and Buck can jump like Winston, as some examples. Paladins also replicates other parts of Overwatch pretty blatantly, such as the play of the game system, which is meant to identify the best place of a match. The game modes in Paladins, while pretty limited, are actually a tad different than its predecessors, with the usual payload mode, but also a capture point system, where both teams fight for initial control of a point, then the winning team gets a point, and then has to try to capture another point while the losing team defends. Whoever wins that bit gets a point, and the cycle continues until one team reaches a certain number of points and wins the game. It's not inherently unique, but the presentation of it is a bit different than normal. As a side note, while I was in the process of making this video, a player versus environment mode was announced for Paladins. There will apparently be different levels, similar to the brawls in Overwatch, and the first one revealed is called Tortoise Power, in which a team of 5 tries to defeat a team of AI consisting of 4 superpowered Makoas and a Pip. So that's something. The biggest things that make Paladins stand out to me are the item buying system and the card system. I'll start with item buying. Buying certain items to increase certain stats has always been present in MOBAs like Dota and League of Legends, but Paladins brought it to the FPS genre as well, allowing for a little something different. You start each game with a certain amount of currency, and can choose one perk from each of 4 different categories to upgrade exclusively for the rest of the game. You get currency from killing enemies, which can be then used to upgrade perks further. The problem with this is that there usually seems to be one option in each category that will usually be the best, rendering the system redundant. Perhaps there are champions that benefit more from different perks, but I haven't played enough to experience this fully. Then there's the card system. Similar to the loadouts of TF2, each champion has certain cards that can be assembled in different combinations before games, with each individual card giving the hero a certain perk, or a bonus to an ability. You then get a certain number of points which can be allocated into these cards in any way you choose, boosting certain cards as bonuses further. This system allows for varying playstyles while still not radically changing the hero itself. You can also unlock new cards and loot chests gained from leveling up, which kinda creates the same conundrum that TF2 has, with not all players having access to the same things, but as a free-to-play game, that's rather acceptable. Overall, it's an interesting system, and I'm curious as to whether or not future FPSs will incorporate anything like it. As for the competitive scene in Paladins, it's interesting. You need to be at least level 4 with at least 12 different champions in order to play competitive in the first place, and it works on a drafting system, where it goes back and forth between the two teams, each team choosing 1 or 2 champions at a time, and there cannot be any more than 1 champion in a given match, meaning if you want to play a certain hero, sometimes you just can't. And while I haven't had the chance to play it myself, the things I've found online aren't particularly positive. And now we come to the biggest problem. Lack of polish. I know the game's still in beta, but when push comes to shove, it's hard to enjoy playing an unpolished game, and Paladins doesn't even come close to the level of polish in Overwatch, or even TF2. While Overwatch has interesting interactions between characters pre-game, and voice lines that occur due to circumstances during a match, Paladins has clunky-sounding champions, talking to themselves and spewing catchphrases.
This is a hot team. It is like a normal team, but with me in it.
My subjects keep saying I'm the bomb. I already know.
You are nothing but dust in the wind.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself!
While some characters are actually fun, like with the interactions between Ruckus and Bolt,
I know why you're so cranky, Bolt.
Why is that?
Because I keep pushing your buttons.
These enemies are really screwed.
I get it.
most are just boring. I could not tell you a single thing about the actual characters of Shaolin or Buck, for example. You can argue that characterization like that is unimportant in an FPS, but I would argue details like that make things more immersive and simply provide a better gaming experience. Paladin's lore seems overall non-existent, or at least whatever potential story details there are seem very elusive to my vast repertoire of searching skills. Even though the practice range is arguably better than Overwatch's, maps in general seem boring and samey, and the music is simply uninspired and dull. One reason communication is impossible is the difficulty in using hotkeys. You need to press 3 or 4 different keys to say a single thing. It's absurd. Overwatch, bam, bam, you're done. Bam, you're done. Even if it allows for more types of voice lines to be said, in a fast-paced game like Paladins, the ability to say things like
"Need healing"
or
"Ultimate is ready"
really cannot afford to be hidden behind any more than 2 keystrokes. There's simply no time to spare to navigate menus. That trade-off is just not worth it. Also, plenty of abilities between champions seem much too similar. There's way too many dash and teleport abilities. Some champions even have more than one. And though it's not a matter of polish, it's rather irritating that not all characters are available from the get-go. But again, being a free-to-play game, that's understandable. This isn't to say I straight up don't like the game as a standalone game. Overall, is it awful? No, not by most means, it's just the alternatives are better. Paladins isn't a bad alternative for those who cannot afford or do not want to pay for Overwatch, but at that point I'd just recommend TF2. And paying for Overwatch is very much worth it if you can afford it and enjoy the multiplayer FPS genre. I might be a little biased on that point, but whatever. Also, there are horses in Paladins. Forgot to mention that. Horses.
Lisa!
So what have we learned? Well, nothing that hasn't been heard before, really. But I hope I laid out a little more clearly for you the pros and cons of each game in a broad sense, and the similarities and differences between them. The debate about what copied what and what is better than what is not black and white, and I hope to have facilitated some more intelligent discussion on the topic, rather than the mess of people yelling at each other about how their opinions are wrong that we have now. In the meantime, keep playing whichever game you prefer, because if you have fun with it, that's all that matters. Anyway, see you in the next video.